All small children aspire to be doctors and nurses and teachers, and of course lawyers. I had an aspiration as well. I wanted to become a stand-up comedian. On one particular weekend, my parents decided to take the family to Lakewood, New Jersey. The headline comic that night was none other than my favorite all-time comic, Morey Amsterdam. And I was going to be allowed to stay up with the big people show. Well, that evening, after we sat down, the band leader came out and said, well, sorry folks, it's snowing, and Morey Amsterdam will not make it to the show this evening. Oh, we were crestfallen until he announced that there would be a talent show for all the kids. I had a lot of jokes in my repertoire, all of them Morey Amsterdams. I participated in the show and I won the talent contest. And I came back to my parents' table. The maitre d' made an announcement that Morey Amsterdam was actually at the hotel. He had made it through the snowstorm and was going to perform. It's fabulous. Morey Amsterdam came out on stage and said, and did 5 or 6 one-liners. Needless to say, I had done all of them. People were actually booing him, and they were yelling that the kid was funnier. Once the band leader let him in on the joke, he came to the front of the stage and said, where's the kid? Get him up here. At the time, I was hiding under my parents' table, and my father literally dragged me the length of the showroom and put me on stage with Morey Amsterdam. He asked me if I knew any more jokes. Sure, and I proceeded to tell him 2 of his own jokes. He did the obligatory, how old are you? Do you want to be 7? Do you want to be 8? He went through the whole litany of jokes, of insult jokes, and sent me on my way. I always remembered it, and it was always a great night for the whole family. Let me tell you a little bit about comedians. Morey Amsterdam was a vaudevillian who played from show to show to show with little or no notoriety, until he met a man who he knew in the streets who said, why don't you come on this show? Well, he wasn't prepared to be on a particular show, radio show. And he said, what do you mean you're not ready? You're the human joke machine. Well, that little light went off in his head, and he said, that's it, I'm the human joke machine. He ultimately had a radio show called Morey Amsterdam, the Joke Machine. His career was off and running, and all of you know the rest of his story. Don Rickles, my other favorite comedian, was playing dives all over Miami Beach. One night, while he was on stage, Jackie Gleason came in the middle of his act, grabbed a chair, and asked that a table be set up on stage for him. Of course, he sat on stage and listened to about 10 or 15 minutes of Rickles' act and walked off. Well, Don Rickles was crestfallen. Here was his big chance to become a national sensation, and it was gone. Needless to say, the next morning, Gleason's people called him to say he was the most original comic they had heard in many years, and gave him the names of different agents who would put him in the best clubs in the United States. Of course, again, you know the rest of that story. I had to think about these stories because I still wanted to be a stand-up comedian. But I realized it was very, very dangerous path to take, and you never really knew if that little spark would hit you. So I went from stand-up comedian to stand-up pharmacist. Yes, take my drugs, please. The second story I want to tell you is about a trip my parents took to Las Vegas. Page forward about 23 years. Every evening my parents would go to bed early because they were tired. And every evening I would go out on the town and go up and down the strip, especially to see my favorite, Don Rickles, in the lounge at the Sands Hotel. I laughed every night, but I did learn the secret to his act. And that was, as people registered to come in, people with ethnic names or people who were on their honeymoon were always put in the front row. And he had a repertoire of jokes he used every night on these people. On the last night of my parents' vacation, I asked them if they would join me at the Rickles show, and they could sleep on the plane if they got home too late. Of course, they agreed. My mother asked me if the air conditioning in Las Vegas in July, by the way, was very high in the Sands Casino. Of course, I said yes. And then that same little light bulb went off in my head that must have gone off in Morey Amsterdam's head. And I said, I think you ought to take your mink. She had a little mink wrap because I think it's very cold. And off we went to the Sands. As we walked in, the maitre d' walked up to us, and I said, I want the front row. And before he could tell me that the front row was for free, I pointed him just over my left shoulder, and he saw my mother walking in, with a mink wrap and her Lydig Avenue blue-gray hair. Well, they had a perfect pigeon. And as soon as Don Rickles came out, he walked over to my mother and asked her, "Are you a Jewish lady?" And she said, "Yes." He said, "Good. You're either a Jewish lady or you're an old beaver in heat." Needless to say, he bothered her throughout the show, and we all loved it. Your dreams, I believe that these stories illustrate that your dreams can be fulfilled, and that you should chase them, because you never know when that little white light will go off in your head and you'll be on a path to stardom. Thank you very much.